Several years ago, I met a really unique sell-side analyst. What a sell-side analyst does is works on Wall Street advising big investors as to what companies make for a good investment. He also advises C-suites on what they should be doing to then create better results. And this guy's really sought after. His advice is highly valued. He's truly a thought leader in that space. And he said something to me that has really stuck with me ever since. He said, look, I've got every 52-week lagging everything that I could ever want. I know everything that's happened, past tense. What I don't have is a forward-looking measure. I don't have a reliable way of understanding what's coming down the pike. That brings us to the Snack50 and the database that it's built on. So the Snack50 report covers the top 50 brands in the snacking category across a number of subcategories and evaluates what's going on in the marketplace. It not only explains why consumers are behaving in the way they are, but what's coming along, what to look forward to so that teams can craft strategy and be ready as the marketplace evolves. So this is what we're interested in, right? What's going on in consumer and shopper minds? Easy to ask, hard to answer. What is it that really drives interest? What attracts people to categories and brands? And then what translates to that action, actually the buying behavior that we want? We're going to talk about private label and store brands today. There is definitely something happening out in the marketplace. It's a pretty big deal, but it's not what everybody thinks. It's not just price trading down. There's a lot more to it. And in the next few minutes, you're going to have a total reframe, a total fresh perspective on what's going on in the marketplace, particularly relative to inflationary pricing, store brands, private label, and more importantly, what to do about it. I mentioned a database. So everything I share today is from a database called the Psych Pulse. As the name indicates, it measures consumer psychology. It measures the why. It measures the deep decision-making criteria that people use. And everything that I'm going to share here is US data. So this is from the US database, which comprises roughly 40,000 records. As I mentioned, we're looking at the top 50 snacking brands today, and we're going to use benchmarks from the total database. But in terms of age, ethnicity, household composition, et cetera, this is representative of the US. The first thing I'm going to talk about is what we call consumer zeitgeist. That is, what is the macro force that's driving people's perceptions, that's driving their behavior? And the framework that this is built upon is what we often refer to as a decision map. This is the foundational emotional set of factors that drive decisions. So there are 4 drivers and 5 barriers. I'm going to focus today more on the driver's side of things. Sometimes people's decisions are driven by what we call function, rational, comparative, things that make sense. It's usually what we humans think we think. We think we make rational decisions. More often than not, though, experience, new sensory discoveries, conformity, social belonging and bonding, or impulse, what feels good now. More often than not, that's what's really driving our behavior. On the barrier side, price is one, and I'm going to talk about price. But that, usually you ask somebody, well, how do you decide? They say, well, I look at the price. Yes, it matters, but the other 4 barriers are typically far more punitive. They impact behavior and decisions far more than mere price. So time, social, physical, and emotional barriers. So this is the framework that the database is built on. This is what I'm going to be sharing with you, but it's all built on a really simple, fundamental principle of human behavior. The carrot and the stick. Human beings will seek the carrot and we avoid the stick. So that psychology, that framework, the drivers and barriers that I mentioned give us really nice fidelity on what's going on in the marketplace. But remember, this is all about how do we sweeten the carrot and how do we shorten the stick? What do our consumers perceive the carrot to be from those 4 drivers, and how can we shorten the stick with those 5 barriers? So looking at this longitudinal data, let me orient us a little bit to this data view. So what we see here is a longitudinal view of that consumer zeitgeist. So you see impulse, what feels good now, experience, new discoveries, conformity, social belonging and bonding, and function. Those 4 drivers we've tracked over time. And what you have across the bottom is what we've characterized as the pre-COVID baseline. So this is basically 2019. So on the far left, we have pre-COVID baseline, and then you have every quarter subsequently up to Q1 2024. So what we're looking at is, what's been driving in general people's behavior. Interestingly, as you look kind of through the COVID, years, 2020, that experience, exploration, really spiked up. That's the COVID bakers, the people that went out and bought a boat, all the new hobbies that everybody picked up in COVID. Culturally, we were in a very exploratory phase. Where it really gets interesting is when we look at the years since. If you look at, sort of 2022 to present, something really clear and really dramatic has happened. In fact, we've had to increase this scale a couple times because the index has kept increasing on this impulse driver. Do what feels good to me now. All the stress, all the pressure, all the all the negativity that has come with the pandemic and some of the the carry-on forces that follow has driven, in general, consumers to say, look, I don't know what's coming tomorrow. I'm just going to do what feels good right now. This impulse driver has been dramatically growing. We did a 2-year longitudinal study looking at sales performance in the beverage space. And in fact, the brands that served that impulse driver in the minds of consumers, they grew volume and penetration. The brands that people didn't think were serving that were serving one of the other drivers, they stagnated or declined. So this is driven, and this zeitgeist drives real marketplace behavior. And so this impulse, sort of meteoric and continued rise over recent years has certainly kept our attention. As we look at what lies ahead, I promise you some forward-looking. I mean, this is what's happened over the past several years, and I promise some forward-looking guidance. So we've seen that impulse, is pulling ahead. What we've predicted is that this impulse driver will give way to the experience driver. That culturally we will transition into a phase of exploration, discovery, looking for new experiences. What we've seen is that experience and conformity just in recent quarters have started to uptick and impulse has started to decline. So the impulse driver since 2023 is down 3.5%, which sounds like sort of a small number, but given the longitudinal nature of this and the slow moving nature of these macro forces, this zeitgeist, it's a big deal. It catches our attention because these are not something that happen overnight. These shifts aren't going to happen next month or next quarter. They're going to happen in the quarters, months, and couple years ahead. So impulse is starting to go down. Experience and conformity are starting to come up. This looks at the next 3 quarters, so Q2, Q3, through the end of 2024 projecting out. And you can see impulse isn't falling off a cliff. That's still the macro force that's driving our behavior. But experience and conformity are coming up. As I said, we expect experience, the desire for new discoveries, to kind of be the next big wave. Conformity is right there with it, and in the US with the election year, things like that tend to drive tribalism. They tend to drive high social relevance. That may, and that likely is, having a strong influence. And so those two forces, impulse is down 3.5, experience and conformity, the desire for new discoveries and the desire to bond and have meaningful social experiences, they're increasing a similar amount. So that gives us a really good indicator, thinking about strategy, innovation strategy, and just macro consumer behavior, gives us a really good prediction of what's coming. Interestingly, when we look at price, so this takes those 4 drivers and adds what we call the price cost. And I said, look, price is real. You don't, you log on to the internet and everything's talking about inflationary pricing. We're seeing it with consumers. What's interesting and what's important about what's happening right now is that for the first time since Q1 2023, where that impulse really peaked, this price barrier is being felt, and it's actually eclipsed. The stick has outweighed the carrot in a somewhat durable fashion. What's happening then as a result is that as the headlines, are quick to announce, the sky is falling on inflationary pricing. Everyone's trading down to store brands. What's happening is people are in what's called an avoidance mindset. They're evaluating the cost. That is true, and we see Circana recently published that food prices are up 30% since pre-pandemic. Interestingly, we're measuring feelings. We're not measuring the actual prices. We're measuring the concern of prices, which often is far more influential in driving behavior. And in fact, price concern is up 30% since 2019, and just in the past year, 12%. So yeah, people are concerned. They're paying attention to it. They're trying to figure it out. But where the plot thickens is they're not just making decisions to save money. There's still a huge amount of emotion in play. So looking at the past 5 years, this is the picture. And as I said, we believe that the impulse is going to stay relatively flat and declining, and experiencing conformity is going to grow. Okay, so what is this driving out in the marketplace? What's the market performance when we look at snack brands, when we look at categories? Here are the top 10 for this year's Snack50. What do we notice? The top 6 brands, 1 through 6, are all store brands. They're all, now, I say store brands, we're talking a lot about private label. I refer to them as store brands because in most cases they're brands in their own right. They're not just a knockoff. We see some, 7, 8, 9, 10, we see some familiar brands that are typically near the top of the Snack50, but when I saw these data, it was a little bit of a jaw drop moment. I'm something of a skeptic when it comes, and if anybody's seen any of my other content, I'm something of a skeptic when it comes to this whole trade down narrative. People don't respond rationally, and they don't go home and make a spreadsheet and start to balance their budget. They often behave very emotionally. It's kind of what I talked about. Things have been tough the last few years. The response has been very emotional. I'm just going to do what feels good. I'm going to drive through. I'm going to grab this drink. I'm going to do what will help me feel good for the next few minutes. So it really caught my attention. I'm sure it catches everyone's attention. The top 6 brands are store brands. Versus last year, so on the right we have the 2023 top 10, and you can see the only store brand private label in there is number 3, Great Value, Walmart's Great Value. It's number 1, and we just looked at the 2024 top 10. Okay, so everybody goes, yeah, we've heard this. Everybody's trading down. They're gonna, the sky is falling on national brands. They're gonna start, everyone's gonna start buying generic and private label. That's not the complete story, and that's really not why this is happening. What we look at, and what's important to measure, is what we call interest in action. What drives interest? What's driving people's interest in store brands? It's not just that, oh, this is a cheaper version, so I'll automatically trade down. There are things that are attracting them. What represents the carrot when it comes to these top 6 store brands? And then there's action. What is it that makes them routinized, that makes them adopted, that really makes them replace a national brand? What we see, looking at this market map, weighing interest and action. And just to orient us a little bit to this, it's obviously a 2x2. Vertically, we have interest. How much do they want it? How interested in it are they? How much emotional attention and bandwidth are they paying to it? The bottom is action. How much are they actually buying it? There's so many things that people like and want, but don't then do. We need to have both interest and action in order to drive market performance. And what you note here is that many of those store brands and many of those top 6s are really high on interest. It's up in this quadrant that we call exploration. People are investigating it. They're exploring it. I mentioned that, that price, that rise of that price cost that everyone's experiencing. They're going, okay, I better look into this. But it's not this black and white automated trade down behavior. They're exploring it. So they're up in that quadrant. As you move to the right, the action, you see that very few of them have been adopted. Very few of them has the marketplace at the Gen Pop level said, okay, yes, this is our new thing. Aldi and Great Value, the snack products in this case from Aldi and Great Value, have moved into that rarefied space that we call promised land. And the reason it's so rare is, as we'll see in a few minutes, a lot of big national brands, big established brands are down in this routine space. They're very routinized. They're the default. They're what we buy. They've established themselves. What's difficult when you're in that routine space is maintaining interest, staying relevant. It's almost like the behavior becomes automated, which is obviously desirable from a brand level, but people stop thinking about it, and there are liabilities that come with that. So the fact that Great Value and Aldi, probably the most private label of that list of brands are over in that space. That's a significant headwind. That, that implies that Walmart and Aldi, given their scale, are going to be something of a battleground. Interestingly, just this week, Walmart announced the launch of their new store brand, Better Goods, which actually looks a lot more like the Amazon and Target brands, Aplenty, Favorite Day, Happy Belly, Good and Gather. So it'll be very interesting in the next Snack 50 to see, that Good Better brand will be up in this high exploration. The question is, how can manufacturers of national brands defend their space? How can they prevent these store brands from moving over into the routinized high action space? And this is where the database is really instructive, and it gets very interesting. So here we have the top 10, and you see the overall Psych Pulse score. This is an index score. The pluses and minuses are the degree to which they're statistically significantly above or below the benchmark. Look at what's happening with those top 6. They've got these incredible interest scores. That's what I just showed you. But excluding great value, look at this middle section. Look at Aldi, Aplenty, Favorite Day, Happy Belly, Good and Gather. They've got really low action scores, and that's what I just demonstrated. They've also got really low incidence. Again, excluding great value. They're not very big brands. You look down at the other 4 in the top 10, they're in the 80s in terms of incidence. So the point is, this shift is not, it hasn't happened, but it's happening. There's this high exploration, and over the coming quarters and months and years, consumers and shoppers are going to be evaluating, is this our new thing? Are we going to switch to these store brands? And as I said, looking back to a previous slide here, the criteria they're using are not just going to be what's cheapest. The criteria, the carrot, is going to be what helps me feel good now? What helps me explore and experience new things? What helps me bond with my family? So when you look at it through that lens, here we have the largest manufacturers in the Snack 50. So there are 9 store brands. Frito-Lay's, PepsiCo Frito-Lay has 10 brands. Hershey's got 7, Kellanova's got 5, and so on. When you look at the averages, their average Psych Pulse scores, again, you see that store brands are fairly dominant. Again, however, you see that the interest score is what's driving that. They're very interested, they're exploring it, but the national brands, the big manufacturers, still totally have the edge when it comes to action, what people are actually buying. There is still plenty of runway to address this and to manage consumer perspective and consumer decision making. It's not just this, oh, well, everybody's trading down is going to buy the cheapest thing. When we think about private label and store brand, this is what we think about. Knockoff Lay's, okay? It's great value, yep, it's a knockoff version. As I said, I'll acquiesce that is really kind of a private label. It is a sort of an option to the national brand. You can argue that they're doing some very interesting things in terms, from a brand perspective and actually creating value. But this is sort of what everybody pictures, and it certainly is having an effect with Walmart. When you look at some of these others in the top 6, that's not the case. If I'm a consumer and I'm out looking to explore new sensory discoveries, here's Amazon's Aplenty. Sweet ghost pepper kettle cooked, made in Italy, gluten-free. You look at these products, these are not store brands. These are not knockoffs. These are actually serving, at a very small footprint, they're serving that desire. And when Amazon really decides to hit the gas on these, it's going to have a serious impact. Likewise, with Target's Favorite Day, if I'm looking to bond with my family, I'm looking to find new experiences we can enjoy. Handful of everything trail mix, rainbow chip treats, it says fun, Halloween tortilla chips. These are not knockoffs. These are not cheaper versions of a national brand. These are experiences in their own right. Here's the total Snack 50, everything on here. And one thing you see that is typical is this inverse correlation between high interest and high action. As I said, it's very difficult to maintain interest and have people excited and paying attention and giving their mental bandwidth to your brand and have it be highly routinized. So you see the brands, Reese's gets into the rarefied promised land. Lay's, Hershey, M&M, some of those real power brands are out there. And the challenge is to continually push for that relevance with activation, with innovation, in order to recapture the consumer imagination, ward off consideration and the exploration that people are expressing relative to store brands. When we look starting to look at some subcategories, when we look just at salty, You see that really popcorn and pretzels are having a lot of interest. Consumers are exploring it. They haven't adopted these brands yet. There are several brands that are down kind of in no man's land, as we call it, where sort of low interest, low action. I think anyone at Barcel would be surprised to see Takis here. If we cut these data by Gen Z, by younger consumers, I'm certain that would shift. Likewise, like Utz, sort of a newer up-and-comer, a long-standing brand, but has had a lot of investment. It's going to move up in interest. This is just kind of a lack of awareness, and as that brand gets investment, it's going to move up. And then you see a lot of really stalwart brands over in this very reliable root and eye space. The challenge is, as those store brands come on, and all the macro forces are compelling people to investigate them, these brands need to react and pull the right levers, pretty quickly. Here's the category of just bars and protein, kind of nutrition bars and protein. Interesting, Blue Diamond is in that rarefied promised land. And you see like meat snacks and others are there's kind of not a whole lot of news in this space, but there's certainly opportunity that we see with that. This one was interesting to me. This is sweet treats and confections. This is like the fun category, right? I mean, this is candy and sweets. This should be really high interest. All these big brands are down in the routine space. It's become routine, and that's not necessarily where we want to be or where brands can really drive the growth that they're trying to. The world's biggest disruptor, Feastables from Mr. Beast, that they had a viral video weeks ago where they really called out Hershey's. I mean, they get tons of attention with the Feastables chocolate brand. They've gotten all the interest. Now, will they drive repeat? Will it become a real brand or just a flash in the pan? Mr. Beast Burger was going to be the end of QSR, fast food as we know it. It came and went. It drove all the interest, low action. So, someone running Feastables needs to think about how to really make this an enduring brand. People running Hershey's need to understand that there's opportunity to take, America's chocolate and drive more interest. So looking at where people think these categories fit, it's interesting. Conformity is sort of a crowded neighborhood. So these are indexes of basically what consumers think. So popcorn, tortilla chips, pretzels, potato chips, cheese snacks, all over in that, they're good for us. The experience, explore new things, chocolate, cookies, snack mixes. Consumers are perceiving that that's what they do. There's only one over in the impulse, the feel good now. Now, some of these brands do have some signal in that space, but this is their primary index. Fruity Chewy Candy is the only one that is really kind of pinning the needle on, this helps me feel good now. That's something the market should be looking at. We need more snacks that are serving that need, and there's a lot of opportunity to differentiate with that. And last but not least, function. There are several brands, nuts, meat snacks, snack bars, and chewing gum that are in this functional. They make sense. Typically not a place you want to be. That's typically not the richest territory for snacks. So if I were in one of those categories, I'd be looking at where my brand sits, and opportunities to differentiate and drive more emotional relevance. We've got all this at the brand level. Obviously, I can't dig into every portfolio, every category, but we're happy to do that. In applying this, we really can answer sort of the myriad of business questions. How do we drive interest in action? I've talked a lot about the zeitgeist, but we create decision maps looking at brand equity, competitive equity, positioning, portfolio architecture. We can look at decision personas, turn this on the people. Who are the people we getting? Who are our heavy users? Who are our light users? Things like targeting, segmentation, decision sequences, and journey mapping. And then last but not least, because we're understanding psychology, we get really tangible in activation. You can use what's called judgment and decision-making psychology to really understand how to create not only new news for the trade, thought leadership, but design guidance, claims, purchase triggers. So remember, there is a huge sea change going on. And yes, store brands and private labels in the snack space are at the center of it. But there's far more emotion, there are far more levers available than just price, and the winning brands, the winning manufacturers, the winning portfolios are going to be the ones that focus on what truly drives and truly hinders consumer and shopper decisions.